Welcome to Classroom 5.0, a podcast that uncovers industry insights, cutting-edge research and practical evidence-based strategies that help us all to imagine and design learning environments and pathways for this ever-evolving world, so that together we can best support the next gen to uncover and deliver their unique potential. This episode has been recorded from our hometown of Port Macquarie, which we're grateful to share and enjoy alongside the traditional owners of Beer Pie Country, whose ongoing cultures and connections to lands and waters we celebrate, and whose elders, past, present and emerging, we pay our respect to. Welcome, I'm your host Mariane Power, co-founder of the Posify Group, and I'm thrilled today to be joined on another episode with Lindsay Rattray, who brings his expertise in EdTech specifically, but coming from a background in sciences and technologies, to talk to us today about how we might already leverage the power of exponential technologies and design our learning experiences moving forward to increase student engagement and really harness the power of these tools that we have. I'm going to throw you over to our episode page to check out Lindsay's bio. It is impressive, to say the least. And specifically, I really like to turn your attention to his TED Talk because it really grabbed my interest when, Lindsay, welcome, I heard you speaking about Syria and your adventures over there and what you learned about EdTech. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, thank you.
It's so great to have you here. So tell us all your adventures. I mean, I've got my massive explorer bug back on now that we're coming out of the pandemic. So, we're going to go all technology everywhere today, but let's start with your travels. What took you to Syria and what did you learn while you were there?
It sounds so kind of different and amazing now, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But So, let me start with what took me there. I'm the youngest child, and my siblings had both been in London.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I kind of came to that age where I was like, this is something that I could do, I could go to London, and I was like, they've already done that. So I started thinking of other things that I might do, and I really wanted to travel in the Middle East. And I had a year set aside. But I thought, you don't really want to travel for a year because you find yourself kind of going to, the most amazing mosque in, whatever period, and then you don't really give it the kind of interest it deserves. And so I thought, I know what I'll do instead. I'll find a place to live in the Middle East and I'll learn the language, and then travel around a bit from there. And Syria really just came up as the best place to do that.
Wow.
The Damascus universities, there's lots of students, particularly from Europe,
Mm-hmm.
but other places across the world. They'll go there, in their summer or whatever. It might be studying Middle Eastern politics or something, and actually get some practical Arabic. So I was nothing like them. I was just there off my own bat. But geez, it was an amazing experience.
I love that was an exploration journey that started with that disruptive question of how might I be a little bit different in my family and took you to a part of the world. Oh my goodness. And so coming back to what you were learning over there as well, because you went over having a little bit of Arabic under your belt or with the intention to learn a new language. Where did that come about?
So I went with a little bit of Arabic under my belt, and I think I annoyed most of my fellow students in level 1 because I already knew the alphabet and stuff. But I was swamped very, very quickly with the speed and the difficulty of the language.
Yeah.
Other people went past me pretty quickly, and I actually found it really difficult to remember all of the words that you have to remember. Not from a kind of raw vocabulary point of view, but for example, they're plurals. It's a different word, or you move the letters around a little bit. So you've basically got for each word, you've got to learn, 2 or 3 more. If it's a verb, the irregular verbs and stuff like that. So I was really struggling. And I remember looking around and going, what's the solution to this? I talk about this a bit in my TED Talk.
Yeah.
I came across the flashcards, right? It's a very old solution. And you're meant to pass letters, pieces of paper from one envelope to another. And the reality is I was never going to do that. But I thought I could make something like this on my computer. So that's what I did. And it was, basically, one word of English on one side, a few of Arabic, the corresponding ones on another, spaced repetition. So it automatically figured out whether I got it right last time or, how long it had been since I'd been checked, since I'd tested myself. Yeah, and the other thing so that was all going pretty well, but I found there was like repeated words that just kept coming back at me that I was just never learning, and so I had to build another kind of set of features in there, just conditioned so that they came up in particular sequences, like frequently, and then there was a gap, and then and then just go to a normal, like for a normal word. So all of this was just like getting my mind going, like, there is so much that could be done in this space.
Yeah.
But I also knew that I knew nothing about learning really, like aside from my own direct experience. And when I looked at what else was out there, like Rosetta Stone, it was basically the same kind of thing as what I made, but it just was multimedia, right? So you've got images and sounds and stuff. It's a bit more immersive. But fundamentally, it was really just like engineers like myself. I've got a computer science background, who just kind of got in a room going, like, all right, I'm going to solve learning. I don't really understand what it is, but I'm going to solve it. Some cool stuff, some good original thinking. But from my point of view, I thought I've got to understand what learning is, and how it works. And so my first step on that journey was when I came back to Australia briefly. I studied as an English teacher, and then went back to Syria to teach. So you get that really raw classroom experience of just seeing learning happening, and then that took me later to studying learning sciences, where I could really build the theory around that, which I'd already started to do through some other language qualifications. But yeah, so it was Syria that really sparked that interest in what EdTech could be, and I still think you can see that playing out, that kind of question of like pedagogy, and then there's your technology purist, or like I'm going to fix education kind of mentality that you still see, and you still see it kind of deep in the sector as well. That there are tools that claim that they're going to be the ones that solve education for us. But there's also this great mix now, I think, coming more and more, where you've got a lot of teams having real teaching expertise or learning expertise or classroom expertise or whatever it might be, built in with this really disruptive mindsets as well. People from totally different backgrounds. That's important too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I didn't realize about you that you came from the technology and the engineering side of things, and it wasn't until you had this own experience of needing or wanting to learn something and applying what you knew in technology to that problem, if you like, which is what I really loved about your TED Talk and about the work that you're doing now, in that I think with technology there is that little bit of sometimes a lack of an understanding of that human-centeredness and who we're actually designing these technology solutions for. But before we jump into that, because I really want to, and I'm loving everything, that background that you've added, definitely go and check out this TED Talk. I'm going to put the link in the bio for our listeners. Can you tell us all, myself included, because I'm still learning, what do we mean by EdTech? What are we talking about here?
Yeah, sure. I think it really simply put, it is a tool that helps learning.
Simplest definition I think I've ever heard. Can you please go and tell everybody in industry that that's what it is? Okay. A tool that supports and enhances learning.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And it could be one that's designed for that purpose in the first place. It might be an app that one of our kids is using. It could be a learning management system, but equally it might be something that's not designed for that purpose. It could be Microsoft Teams, for example, or it could be something that you kind of never really thought of EdTech exactly, like Wikipedia, for example. Is you could absolutely call that EdTech. You could call Google EdTech really if you wanted to. It's probably helpful to keep the definition somewhat restricted to the context, I guess, that you're using it.
Yeah.
But it's no more complicated than that.
Yeah, fantastic. And so this has predominantly become your space that you've moved into. So you came back from Syria having designed this app that was helping you at first to learn a new language and then apply that, I think I've understood, to help other students also learn as well. What was the next part of the journey? So going in and studying learning and applied then technology to learning. Tell us a little bit about the research you've done. It sounds really interesting around teacher engagement, student engagement, and EdTech.
Yeah, so what I really was keen to understand is you've got, we often talk about, like, does this technology work, this education technology, does it work? Without really thinking about how do we use it. And that really goes back to what I was saying earlier, right? Like it
Yes.
could be something technology or an education technology, depending on how we're using it.
Mm.
Equally, it could be a technology that works, an efficacious piece of education technology, or not, depending on how we use it. So I did my master's at Sydney Uni, but the context of my research was Monash, and I looked at, for first year computer science courses, how is student engagement affected in lectures, so very specific kind of situation, by the use of classroom response systems, which
Break
are
that one
really
down for
simply,
me. Good, yes.
yeah, really simply, they are just a survey tool, a kind of instantaneous survey tool.
Okay.
So you get to a certain point, you give some explanation in the lecture, some kind of content learning, if you like, and then you get to a point where you want your students to apply something, and you pose usually a multiple choice question to them. They answer usually on their phones, and then you get that feedback. And what's really interesting here is the way in which you use all of the little features in there that don't kind of seem obvious at first really affects student engagement. So as I said, the tool's instantaneous, but as a teacher, as a lecturer, you've got a choice about whether or not you reveal other students' answers immediately or not, or whether or not you reveal the correct answer or not, or what kind of question you even ask in the first place. That's pretty much not contained in the tool at all, that decision. Some interesting findings are that if you reveal the answer to the question too quickly, the little sugar hit, which is what I call it, of this technology, and students' attention drops away immediately. So
suspense is really important in that way.
Suspense is critical. Like it's like you're telling a story. But another important thing about computer science, and I know that this is true in many other subjects, so I think it's worth mentioning, is that you've got students at very different levels. So some students, they've been like playing around with programming, in year 11, year 12, year 10, whatever. Others have just joined based on the course requirements. So I saw students who looked like they were kind of slacking off, but they were on their computer on various programming forums or in their console programming stuff. So I was kind of like, geez, how do I mark this up? Is this engagement or is this not engagement? Which is a whole separate issue, right? But if you're thinking, how do I engage my students? How do I bring value to them for even coming here or paying attention at this moment? Then just revealing the answer is not the way to do it, because students will immediately go, oh yeah, I got it right, or I didn't get it right. They won't kind of think about why or how.
Right. Yeah. So it's activating that extra layer of critical thinking and reflection, by the sounds of things, by having that little moment of suspense. And as you're talking, I'm starting to see the lecturer in a university hall, and I guess I can apply that then to maybe a teacher or educator in any learning space, as a bit more like a conductor of an orchestra and a facilitator or a curator of an event. This is a really interesting way, I think, of thinking about the role of educators and how they might sort of design their learning experiences. So anyway, I can go off on all these little thought bubbles.
On what you were saying there, I totally agree. And it's about us thinking also about what our roles are. So it's about the role of the educator, but it's about us helping the students rethink their roles. And just revealing the answer to them kind of immediately is saying, up here is the right information, and I'll just lay it out for you. All you've got to do is kind of suck it up, which I know is not the deliberate decision on the part of the lecturers, because I spoke to them, but holding it back, even getting the students to talk about it themselves, and slowly building that culture of that's what we do. It's not just like a random thing that you got thrown at you and like, I didn't come here to talk to someone kind of thing. Promotes that culture of, okay, I'm here to engage. I'm constructing the knowledge with my colleagues, with my peers, in my own mind, in my own context as I go.
So it's more of that co-collaborative learning experience that I know is capturing a lot of attention in terms of the future of education conversation, and where we might be moving. That makes a lot of sense to me. And I'm curious about how the teachers responded. You said that they weren't aware, and what did they do with that next layer of awareness? Or did you notice a shift after that conversation?
I didn't notice a shift because they wanted feedback, but for the sake of the research wasn't on teacher practice and how they act on feedback. They appreciated the feedback and said they'd act on it, but I hope they did.
If anybody is listening and wanting to go and study, I think we could have some teacher feedback there on what would be the next best step a teacher might take with that information. Yeah, how curious.
Yeah, I can say that that kind of change it's going to be slow though, right? Like, particularly without systematic teacher observation at university level, it's not a thing that's commonly done, and it takes time and it takes a professional.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, especially if we're actually shifting our thinking around, what an educator's role is, and if it's to curate an experience of learning, as opposed to, I think I heard you sort of talk about that more hierarchical expert at the top of the room and learner in the space. That's a very different set of skills, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also what is our definition of the particularly with something like computer science, of the professional that is going to be, hopefully 5-10 years time down the track. What are their skills going to be? Are they going to, take a brief or a set of requirements and just translate that into a piece of code? Or are they going to be working in a team, coming across things that they've never seen before, trying to figure out how to do new things? In other words, looking out into the rest of the industry or their peers, trying to figure things out together. I mean, it's kind of like the way I've asked the question. We know that it's the latter.
Yeah.
But it's very easy for us to conceptualize knowledge and learning as the really simple, like, what have we got right in front of us right now kind of stuff. And here it is now. We can kind of decide, I know it or I don't. Not I need to figure it out, or even more abstractly, I need to know how to figure it out.
Yes. And so thinking about that futuristic version of imagining our future learning spaces, but doing that collaboratively and in between industries and combining expertise in that interdisciplinary way is what I think I'm hearing you say, which for me then raises or brings back that question around your fascination, and just seems to be so inbuilt within you about applying human-centered design to design these technology-based solutions. So your engineering background, those technical skills, but really having a strong sense of empathy for the user, who's going to benefit. So yes, there's the student who's a user who's engaging with the hopefully improved learning by having access to all of these different EdTech capabilities. But then there's obviously the educator as well, and what that sort of process looks like. Can you tell us a little bit about your fascination with human-centeredness and why you think it's so important as we design future solutions for learning?
Sure, yeah. So I think really what we've got with human-centered design and design thinking is a new methodology for helping create something that will help people achieve something else. So if we go back to our definition of education, a tool that helps us learn, right? So perhaps if we then go to what it is, what is design thinking? The most common form, I'll get people to kind of visualize something in a second. To describe it is the double diamond. So at the start, you've got a user or a person, a student. They want to achieve things. They have needs. They have problems. They have pain points. They have opportunities. So the first stage is really exploratory, really openly. You try to understand all of those things. You map them out. There's a whole set of tools used to do that, and user research methods to do that. And then you choose one to zero in on. So what's a pain point, for example? So in the case of classroom response systems, the pain point you've got is that essentially you've got learning coming just at you. You don't have any opportunity to apply that learning or to interact with it. So just to give people something to kind of think about, that's a pain point there. And then you've got your one pain point, your one opportunity, whatever it is, and then you start thinking about what are some solutions that might help. You start cheap, and you start really open. When I say cheap, I mean you don't build anything. You write some stuff down. You draw some pictures of some things. You create some basic little interactive things that a UX designer can create for you in 20 minutes. You put those things in front of people, and you start to learn more and more about it.
So you gather the feedback from your user.
Exactly. You gather the feedback, and then as you learn more and become more confident about what you're doing, about the direction, you keep iterating over those things. So let's say it's a prototype, you start making it more and more real, you learn more and more, and you keep hitting whatever your metrics are. So let's say in this classroom response systems, it's going to be student engagement. But at the same time, you're learning more about how should this tool be used. As I said, I think if you ignore that, then you're ignoring, like you're back in like technology is going to solve education kind of mindset. You keep doing that, and then you get to a point where you've got a product, which is that product's never going to end. It's you're going to have to keep doing that as well. But I think you can still say,
as we are discovering with the Posify Academy, it is a never-ending beast. And thank you to everyone giving us all their important feedback. And to your point, every time you come back and you iterate and you build and you develop and you present back to the market, it really is a collaborative opportunity, isn't it? To continuously design on the run. And for our listeners who are still not quite yet familiar or can't quite grasp some of these concepts around design thinking and human-centered design, take a look at today's episode page with Lindsay, and I will give you a link to go and do some reading and a simple little metric so you can have a little bit of a look. It's definitely one of the key thinking styles and skills that we're seeing being brought more and more and encouraged in learning because of its applicability really across industries, isn't it? I mean, you're giving us a really great example of how that applies to EdTech, and similarly, design thinking can be used to solve any problem, create a new solution.
Absolutely. Yeah, it can be used for non-technical things, processes, ways of to test ways of thinking. And certainly agree. Yeah, I look forward to my kids teaching me about design thinking when they're a bit old. Sure. They're going to know a lot more about it than I do.
Progressive. Well, yeah, speaking of which, because when we jumped on the call, you were telling me a little bit about your little tiny humans have only just joined us in the world, which is so exciting. And so it begs the question for me, what do you, because my kids are much older, they're in their mid to late teens. I've even got one who's started university. What do you imagine your kids will see, or what do you hope your kids will see, or what are you designing for as they grow up and move through into their formal learning experiences or informal learning experiences?
Well, I guess there's what I see right in front of me, which is just it's really fun just watching learning happen and watching it happen so quickly, and kind of also seeing in some ways but also, as a teacher, I'm so keen to kind of go, all right, like this could be a teaching moment. What can I do? But you realize how much of it is totally out of your hands. And I'm like, why did I even intervene at all? They're in control of their own learning, not me. So that's kind of fun and humbling. But in terms of the future, I think a few things. So the word metaverse is on, a lot of people's lips. I think just because Zuckerberg renamed Facebook to that. And a lot of people have laughed about it, but I actually think it's a very important thing. One of the cool things that I really love about technology is there are essentially no constraints, or none of the formal constraints. So like if we think about a school or a classroom, which are very amazing places and important places. You're bound by the physical world, but one of the amazing things about making technology, if you're a designer or a programmer or someone else involved, is you can really make anything you want. So, for example, there's a tool called Gather, and at the moment they're focusing on the problem of online interaction, where it's good for what we're doing now, in one-to-one or a small group, but once you have a large number, it's kind of impossible. So, people have been at these awkward Zoom drinks and stuff, where it's like one conversation but too many people. And they're making it so that it works more like a physical space, so that you can go,
wow.
if you're near someone in the space, then you can hear them.
Wow, that's amazing. I had not heard of this at all. Is it on the market already or in development right now?
Yeah, it's on the market. Yeah, it's called Gather.
Gather. Okay, I'll throw it in the show notes as well. We can all go check it out after the episode. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what a difference that could make in terms of interaction and collaboration.
Absolutely, yeah. And then you've got, so then you're now no longer bound by the physical world, because you can log in and have that kind of physical like experience.
Yes.
But then if you think about it, we don't have to be bound by the rules of the physical world. Like, you don't really have to step next to someone in order to hear them in the space. So there's no reason why sound couldn't operate in completely different ways that are defined in the world, that are defined by the users or the students, however they want it to work. It's not necessarily for me to say how the sound could work.
Yes. Right? Oh gosh, my mind is starting to get a little bit excited with lots of possibilities around how we could then inspire, those tiny little minds, to your point, when they're just starting. They have no preconceived ideas or biases around how the world works and how we take in information and then do something with it, move it around and create something or deliver it. Hey there, I wanted to tell you about an exciting and innovative solution we've been designing to help solve this problem of how we best prepare the next gen for an ever-evolving world and future workforce that's going to demand a whole new set of skills and mindsets in order for them to thrive. The Posify Academy is Australia's first student-led, evidence-based and curriculum-aligned wellbeing and career development platform, helping young people aged 10 to 14 uncover and deliver their unique potential. It's the first of a trilogy series that's helping young people move seamlessly and with confidence from education and into industry as they design a life and a career of impact. Teaching skills like communication, compassion, creativity, critical thinking, agility, curiosity, resilience, problem solving, all those human capability skills that we talk about here on this podcast, and connecting them with a sense of purpose. To learn more, you can visit theposifygroup.com.au/posify-academy. Now, back to the show. And so what does it look like to harness the power of technology, to your point, to kind of change the rules? And what would that then do to inspiring our big thinking and our brainstorming and our creation of solutions? Oh, you hit a few big ones there. Yeah.
A few other things come to mind. The other thing is, I guess I'll pair two things together. The concept of the extended mind, and I'll pair that with like cyborgism. So, some people might not be into
this is sounding exciting.
Sci-fi. I'm not especially into sci-fi. So maybe if that's the case, we can go down the extended mind path, right? The extended mind is essentially the idea that your mind is not only up here, I'm pointing to my head, it is actually in the world, and you place things in the world. For like really basic example is, you write a note somewhere, and now that memory, that whatever it is that you need to remind yourself about,
piece of consciousness
is there.
Yeah.
But then you do it with your phone as well, right? Like we do, so much of our knowledge is in our phone. But then you think, all right, well, what can I search for? Not just what I've already kind of Wikipedia, Google, the stuff we were talking about before. These are the things that I can access. So if you think about what's knowledge, and this will go back to our point about computer science students, right? What do I know as a person, as a practitioner, as a computer science, as a programmer? Yeah. That's not just what I've got up in my head. It's what I can access elsewhere. It's what I can easily call on, and it may be in other people as well. So and then you go, okay, all right, I'm hiring someone. Do I want the person who goes, everything I know is only up in my head, or the person who goes, actually, I can meet a whole bunch of people very quickly in the organization, and I can figure out who can get what done for me, or I can work with the industry community online, and I can find out all the stuff that I don't know, and you can hire me because I'm a nice guy, kind of thing. So so I think that point is going to become even more important, because we are slowly becoming more and more indistinguishable from the technologies that we use. Those technologies are also making some of our skills redundant. I used to teach English, and I can't spell anymore because of
The grammar and the
autocorrect.
spelling checks are a little bit brilliant now.
Yeah,
Yes.
so some things that we're doing are becoming redundant as well.
Yeah.
So we need to rethink whether or not they are important to us.
Because you've got your own company as well, kind of in this space that might be worth us exploring quickly in terms of how you're looking at this communication piece.
Sure. Yeah. So myself and a friend founded Classcom, which is it's a chatbot for education. So a lot of us have experienced chatbots. The things in the corner is often when you're on a shopping site or something, and they can either answer a question about a product you're looking at, or if something's gone wrong with your order. You type something in, you get that kind of automated responses. And if you've been kind of paying attention, you've noticed that they've gotten a bit better over the last 4 or 5 years.
Yes.
They're not as annoying as they used to be, in short. So ours does the same thing, but it's focused on education. And essentially what that means is that, for example, students could go into the learning management system and say, hey, what have I got due in the next 7 days? Hey, what's the most important thing that I should look at? Hey, what are some successful students in this unit doing? That I'm not doing. Obviously, the implication. And it could make recommendations. It's driven by data, right?
Yeah.
So you need to either enter that data manually, which is not the ideal case, or you can base it on historical data. So successful students, what have they done? You can make recommendations based on that. I think the most important thing, though, is that it's not, you don't use something like that to go, oh, awesome, we've got that, so now we don't need tutors or whatever to answer these kind of questions. They provide convenience and immediacy for students, but what you really want to be doing is say, okay, now we've solved a lot of this easy to answer stuff, and maybe we're even answering it a little bit better through AI. Now what that means is if the student asks something that we don't have a good answer for, we can put them through to someone live, or we can schedule something. That's depending on the organization's schedule and work practices and all that stuff.
And what I love about that concept, and I'm just thinking back, we don't even have to think back that far, when I'm doing my own learning or trying to engage with something new and just streaming through the discussion forum thread to try and find that tiny little piece of information that I'm looking for to ask my next best question. And what I'm hearing you guys designing is a way that I can cut through the noise, get to the information that I need to ask that next best question, but actually to spend my time doing a deeper dive into what it is I'm exploring or working on, to then contribute it back into this iterative feedback loop of expansion of knowledge. If we're gonna, call it as it is, what's the feedback from users, from students, from educators, from people interacting with the tool?
I think when you've got a good enough set of data behind it, the feedback's good. Yeah. Okay. So you kind of need enough data to reach a certain point that users are getting enough answers immediately, so that they don't feel that they're just kind of being vetted essentially by a bot, or getting repeated kind of could you phrase your question a different way kind of responses.
Yes.
And when you link it into the organization, so that like I said, there is access to a human, and you don't feel like you're being blocked from a human. Then the feedback's good. You're essentially leveraging the technology to increase the effectiveness of the spend on your teaching staff. Yeah,
absolutely, and those meaningful connections, right, and the conversations that come from them. Because what I'm hearing consistently throughout everything that you're sharing with us in the technology space is that it's not a replace, that actually this is about how we can use exponential technologies to enhance our human capabilities, as opposed to replace them and shut them out. which is really exciting, I think, for those of us who are feeling a little bit nervous about the role technology would play in the future. And I'm interested to hear your perspective that conversation has shifted pretty dramatically. When did that shift happen for those of us who might not have caught up to the conversation on collaborative learning as opposed to one or the other?
I think it's not so much that the conversation has shifted completely as that there are more people with an education background getting in and owning this space.
Interesting.
The space will get filled, but I think I interact with a lot of Australian companies and international companies, and most of them now have. You're likely to speak to an educator. At least one of the people in the room will have an education background. So I think that change. I think that change has happened. Yeah, I think it has. But equally, I think that there's plenty of work out there that's still in the kind of we're going to fix education mold. Sometimes it produces some good results. It's people just come in and they've got a mindset that everything's gone before them is no good. I certainly don't agree with it. Every now and then it produces good results, but equally it does often produce results that can make themselves all the way into an organization where something's pitched as, we're going to solve interaction for you, or our video platform is going to mean that students are automatically engaged in everything that they have to learn. And when it goes to that extent, it's a problem. I think it's understandable for people to have concerns about that. But the onus is really on us to step in and do something about it. And I think there are opportunities there for education organizations to partner with startups, particularly because they're earlier stage, so they've got less stuff built, to actually work on a problem together.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting that you say that, because when Jen and I were looking at that, COVID hit and we wondered, okay, this is now the time we need to get these critical life skills into the hands of kids and really help them to navigate this tricky time. And, hats off to Jen. I wish she could have been here for this conversation, but she taught herself those basic software skills to bootstrap what is now the Posify Academy. But one of the fears that always and continues, I'm going to be honest, to come up with inside me is, but I'm not a software developer. I'm not like you, Lindsay. I don't have a computer and sciences and tech, well, I have sciences, but technology background. And the more that I'm playing in this space for those educators and psychologists and all the disciplines that we're talking about that can contribute to the future of learning, the more I'm playing in this space, I'm recognizing how important it is to have that cross-pollination of knowledge and expertise and I guess a willingness to think outside the box and to collaborate with other people. I'm so 100% with you that I think the future of EdTech and how we might use it to enhance our learning experiences moving forward isn't set to one industry. I think if we do that, we're going to rob ourselves of the gold and the beauty of this experience. So it's really, inspiring to me to hear you also encourage all of our educators listening and everybody in every industry. Let's all bash heads together and start to collaborate. So exciting. And what about, I need to ask, what are you seeing happen in the EdTech space and specifically in Australia? I'm quite curious. Or we can go globally, but that is really exciting you. That's something that you're watching.
I think there are a few. Let's see.
I put you on the spot there.
Yeah, a little, but
Your short list, go.
I'm trying to tie a few of them together. I think there's a lot happening in the workplace learning world.
Yeah.
So, for example, out of Udemy, which is a very successful startup. Well, it's no longer a startup; it's huge. That basically, spun out of a whole lot of universities and tried to create a kind of video-based university. The founders realized that there were a lot of problems with their learning model, and they identified professional learning as an area that there's a lot of learning in inverted commas that is not real learning. It's interactives, it's ticker box, it's as an organization, we want to feel like we're compliant with X, Y, Z. So as long as we've pushed it out there, job done.
Yeah.
That are going down that social and connected learning path, and trying to figure out ways of how do we embed learning into the organization? How do we get the key things that are needed for that to happen into the workflow of users? And that's what I think I mentioned Microsoft Teams earlier. I think that's a really interesting technology for that, because there are ways you can integrate that tool. I'd suggest people look up David Kellerman at UNSW. Actually, I'll share the link for ways to do that you can embed the way that people learn and the way that people connect with each other and learn into the organization. So you don't just have a website that you log into somewhere that's got a whole bunch of videos and interactives. You've done it or you haven't. You've actually got people having conversations, doing projects, answering questions, maybe linking back to those materials, right? Those materials still exist as part of those conversations. Maybe deep linking to a particular part of the materials, like you're kind of saying, you don't want to hunt through everything all the time. So that'd be one. I think the other thing is that I would cite generally is that there are just more educators stepping up and doing it. Stackle, Flux, Padmas, they're all Australian ones, focused primarily on higher ed, where you've got people with an education background who they've identified something in their field, in the area that they work,
a gap,
and said,
I think the gap.
Exactly, which is the start of that double diamond, right?
Yes.
So they've got all of that experience to start with, and they're seeing what's happening in the startup world and going, okay, we could do this. Like, we could do this differently. So there's also EdTech Australia has been a really good way of linking up. I can share the link for that as well. Good way of linking up everything that's happening, and they're really trying to promote those partnerships between educational institutions and startups, so that you can get startups focused on the right kind of problems, and you can get education institutes able to innovate without kind of having to take huge risks or sign up to things that they don't understand or don't know if they work. I'd say that's
a huge wealth of knowledge into the development and the design as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And like, it's easy for kind of me to opine and say, why don't startups invite more educators in? But when you're actually in it, it's not that easy. So having a way, or even having educational organisations kind of actively looking for it and reaching out, or at least reaching into something like EdTech Australia, really helps.
Yeah, fantastic. And we're going to put some links in the episode page again to all of the wonderful, not only theories that Lindsay shared with us today so generously, but some of the companies and the startups that we've referenced, so that you can all start a deep dive. Quick one from my own curiosity then, Lindsay, because hearing a little bit more about your career journey and that wayfinding path that you've taken, you've clearly hit the nail on love of learning and constantly evolving yourself to be able to design these solutions across different industries. So tell us a little bit about, if you wouldn't mind, your own learning journey as a kid growing up, and specifically, where do you think the gap was for you, or the opportunity was for you, that you hope we might be able to start designing for in the future of learning as we think about the next gen?
Sure. Yeah. Growing up, like school and high school, particularly high school, I actually hated high school. And if you kind of think what was the gap, number one gap I would say is that the boys at my school were not treated with understanding, I don't think. So I think that's a really important gap that we should think about. There's a very well watched TED talk about by Ken Robinson about the idea that we're born creative, and creativity is taught out of us. Not so much to say that it was taught out of us, but that school, but the idea of being a kind of feeling, caring human, to an extent, I think it was about we want you to be this. Not these other paths. Like, we've defined 4 or 5 paths that you could go on, and you choose any of them, but nothing else. Everything else would be a problem. So I think that's something that we really need to think about in terms of how in terms of our kids. And you can see that I didn't hate learning, Like clearly I've fallen in love with it, and I did at times love it, throughout my school time as well. But it did take me a while, actually, at my early stage of university to kind of recover from that, that kind of institutional experience. Yeah.
I'm as you're talking, I'm not sure if you heard episode 1 of this season. We had a good friend of mine, Mike Ellis, and I speaking about some of these issues, and I think there has been a focus on girls and women in education, and a focus on lots of different areas. But I think it is time to revisit the conversation around our biases when it comes to gender and when it comes to learning in general, and looking at the role of creativity. What I'm taking away from your sharing, and thank you for being so honest and candid, is that as a young person you would have really appreciated the time and the space to explore all possibilities. And so with that, one last question, if I may. If we're to imagine together or reimagine to design the future of learning, what is that one wish for a child sitting in a learning space in 10, 15 years' time, who's that little boy that you were? What might they see differently?
Yeah, so I think it's that they're sitting in a place where they're understood, and if they're not understood, it's on the educators, on the adults, let's put it that way, to understand them, to try to help them understand themselves.
Yes.
I think even just recently, there's been quite a few political issues around the identity of kids in school, and for me, the idea that outsiders should be telling a kid who they are. If you kind of put it in those terms, it just seems almost obvious that why would we ever want to do that? And it goes back to that point that kids are born creative, or kids are born X, Y, Z, and we decide to teach it out of them. So that my wish would be that we would never do that. It would be an anathema to all of us, to everyone from the Minister of Education through to kids' peers and ex-students. And I don't know how many teachers actually think that, to be honest. So I don't know how much it's the teachers' responsibilities, but that'd be my wish.
I'm hearing identity and belonging. I love it. Thank you, Lindsay. Where can we all find you to follow up on the work that you're doing, not only in your own company, but with your collaborative opportunities and organisations abroad, and to follow some of the conversation that you're having around the power of EdTech?
Yeah, so the best way is probably LinkedIn.
Cool.
I'll always respond to people on LinkedIn. I love having conversations as we've had. So yeah,
that's where you and I met.
I'm on Twitter.
Fantastic.
It is. I'm on Twitter a little bit as well, but it's just taken a bit of a hit with 1-year-olds.
Brilliant. Well, I'll make sure that we put those. There's no time for social media and for conversations when you've got 1-year-old twins chasing you around. Oh, thank you, Lindsay. It's been an absolute joy and pleasure to speak with you. And thank you to our listeners for joining in for another episode of Classroom 5.0 with our guest today, Lindsay Rattray. And we look forward to seeing you in the next episode. See you later, alligators. Classroom 5.0 is brought to you by the Posify Group, a socially conscious education company arming the next gen with a sense of purpose and the future skills they'll need to thrive in this ever-evolving world. Your ratings and reviews really mean the world to us, so if you loved this episode, do let us know and share it with a friend. We'd like to say thanks to our editing guru, Clint Rance, and his team at My Video Producer, who helped us put this show together. And for today's show notes, links, and more episodes just like these, you can visit theposifygroup.com.au/podcast. Thanks for helping us imagine alive the future of learning. See you next time.